Hello, in this two-part series you'll learn the Schillinger System approach to harmonizing a chromatic melody with chromatic harmony. In part 1 you'll see the fundamentals, an overview of the essential elements in the chromatic system of harmony and a demonstration of the two-step harmonization process. In part 2 we will look at an example application, a 4-minute orchestral composition based on the chromatic harmonization technique. In this tutorial series we study the correlation of harmony and melody from the Schillinger System, Book 6, Chapter 3. Section G presents the technique for harmonizing a chromatic melody with chords from the chromatic system of harmony. In case you are new to the system, you may want to watch this video as an introduction to the terminology. In part 1 you'll learn the fundamentals, including the two-step approach to chromatic harmonization. Part 2 continues the subject with a somewhat longer orchestral composition example based on this technique. You may support my tutorial production efforts through a PayPal donation or become a long-term patron. Let's now start the chromatic harmonization approach. This technique is part of the Schillinger system of musical composition and assumes you are familiar with the chromatic system of harmony. The two-volume book set is divided into 12 thematically structured books. The system potential lies in the systematic, generalized presentation of music composition concepts. In Book 6 you'll find the integration of harmony and melody, which includes the harmonization process, for all combinations of diatonic, chromatic and symmetric harmony and melody. In just 2 pages, Schillinger presents the chromatic harmonization of a chromatic melody technique. I think the topic deserves a more thorough discussion, which is the subject of the current tutorial series. This diagram is an overview of what you will find in this tutorial series, and I will use it as a guide through the subject. Part 1, the fundamentals, is shown on the left, while the orchestral composition example is discussed in Part 2. The harmonization technique is a two-step process that starts with a given chromatic melody. The approach assumes that you are familiar with the Schillinger chromatic system of harmony discussed in Book 5. This special harmony extension also appeared in Part 3 from my recent series on diatonic melody harmonization. And in order to watch this tutorial as an independent episode, I've inserted a section from that video that presents essential components from the chromatic harmony system. So, Section 3 consists of earlier material. In case you are familiar with the subject, skip this section and proceed with Section 4, where I demonstrate the application of the chromatic system of harmony. The chromatic system of harmony is part of Schillinger's special theory of harmony. I have not covered it yet in any of my earlier YouTube tutorials, and therefore will take a sidestep and discuss relevant chromatic harmony aspects. Schillinger's Book 5, Chapter 13 is about the chromatic system of harmony. Through chromatic alteration operations applied to diatonic harmony, we obtain a derived extended harmonic idiom in the style of the late Romantic period, with roving chords that frequently switch between tonal centers. I will use this overview diagram with essential chromatic system of harmony elements. It is a subset from the techniques covered in Book 5, Chapter 13. I never could figure out exactly how Schillinger arrived at this system. I guess it is a mix of statistical analysis of late 19th century music, combined with a rigorous filtering of all options available. This system of harmony will produce interesting chord progressions, sometimes with neo-Riemannian theory character, and allowing you to easily move away from the diatonic system limitations. Let's have a closer look at the diagram. This system of harmony involves chromatic operations. Diatonic chordal functions will undergo semitone chromatic alterations as a 3-note group: diatonic, chromatic, diatonic. For example, C to C sharp to D. This yields a 3-note chromatic group, where starting and closing chord may be either a triad or a 7th chord, but the middle chord must be a 7th chord, thus obtaining a balance, tension, release pattern. The chromatic note alterations involve 3-element combinations of chordal functions 1, 3, 5 and 7, and I will show these aspects in multiple short examples. In this harmony system, we may have multiple parallel chromatic operations, but we'll start with the single alteration operation. It is also important to realize that this process is applied to 3 adjacent chordal functions, where the most common is the 1-3-5 basis, the combination of root, third and fifth. Listen to the alteration direction of each chordal function for each triad type, starting with the major triad. Root and fifth move in ascending direction, while the major third descends. The third element is the neighboring diatonic degree from the scale. For the minor triad, these directions become the reverse, with descending root and fifth, and the minor third ascending. In case of an augmented triad, we only apply semitone alteration to chordal functions 1 and 3. For the diminished triad, the root descends. The chordal function 3 moves in upward direction. The semitone note alteration pattern is part of a 3-element chromatic chord group. Here you see a number of examples. Opening and closing chord may be either triad or 7th chord. The middle chord must be a 7th chord. Chords may be in root or inversion position. See the labels at the top. In the score I annotated the single alteration operation chordal functions. Notice the constant chordal function pattern 3-3-3 in the first example, the single change example 7-7-1 discussed later, and the 2 multiple chordal function change examples 3-5-7 and 3-1-7. Since a chordal function 7 must resolve properly, some chordal function changes are impossible. The following examples demonstrate different opening triad types. Note that there are both diatonic and non-diatonic options for the final chord in the group. These examples demonstrate how the alteration operation yields chromatic chord groups that could not be achieved in the strictly diatonic system. You may want to interpret these chord changes in the neo-Riemannian theory context. We are working in a new harmonic idiom where tonal centers move all over the place. When the opening chord structure in the chromatic group is a 7th chord S7, we may apply a chromatic operation to that chordal function 7. In case of either a major or minor 7th, there is semitone descending motion. Here are examples for 4 different 7th chord structure types. Do not apply a chromatic operation to the diminished 7th. In the 2 examples of a chromatic chord group starting with a 7th chord, chordal function 7 is chromatically descending and you may use constant or variable chordal function changes. As I said before, I will not discuss the full chromatic system of harmony, but the next important operation type is the double parallel chromatics. When the lower chordal functions 1, 3 and 5 form a major triad, either chordal function 1 or 5 now move in descending direction, in parallel with the major third. Also for the minor triad, the chromatic step changes direction. Functions 1 or 5 move upward in parallel with the minor third. Root and 5 are the fundamental chromatic alteration, a 3-note pattern, while the 3 is called complementary and moves once only. Here you see two examples with double parallel chromatics, the first starting from a 7th chord, a case that Schillinger does not demonstrate in his book, the second opening with a triad. The voice leading of the first example has the middle chord, chordal function 7, irregularly resolving upward, but the G to G sharp to A pattern is more important here. For this episode on chromatic harmonization, we need two more elements from the Schillinger chromatic system of harmony. Chromatic operations yield 3-note patterns. These may be juxtaposed, where the next chromatic alteration starts on or after the closing note of the previous group. Alternatively, we find overlapping groups, with the next pattern starting on the middle element in the group. In the chromatic system, you may use what Schillinger calls coinciding chromatic groups. Outward from or inward motion towards a chordal function doubling. Here are 5 examples of opening and closing motion for different chordal functions. These may also be doublings at the octave interval. We return to the process diagram and note the two-step process on the left, where we start from a given chromatic source melody, and in step 1 use the chromatic system of harmony to create a 3-part harmonization. Then, in the next step, we add an extra voice in order to obtain a 4-part chord progression. Throughout this series, I will use a single chromatic melody. The starting point is this 12-tone melodic continuity that avoids a tonal center. I turn this into a longer melodic continuity by inserting chromatic groups with intermediate semitone steps. Schillinger recommends long-duration melody notes. You'll also find strings of 2 or more chromatic steps. Note that by some divine or diabolical intervention I omitted pitch D. As always, the devil is in the detail, but fortunately that does not affect the harmonization process. The melody has apex pitch F5, and a multiple subphrase structure emerges through the use of repeated notes. The first step is to create a 3-part harmony accompaniment in the chromatic system. This implies that each chromatic melody element forms a 3-note chromatic operation in a 4-part setting, selecting an element from the chromatic system of harmony options that we saw earlier. In this score, I've marked the chordal function numbers for each chromatic pitch. That yields the chord progression shown with chord labels. Now watch the chromatic chord group element selection. You'll find a number of single operations adhering to the direction guidelines for major or minor chord structures. Next, there are parallel double instances. I also demonstrated two inward and outward contrary motion coinciding groups. The result is a mix of juxtaposed and overlapping chromatic chord groups. Chromatic motion may also occur in the harmony only, a case not demonstrated in the Schillinger book example, and here are two such cases. Then, finally, control the voice leading, with maximized stepwise motion and correct handling of the many dissonant sevenths, raised or lowered fifths, and the occasional dissonant nine-chordal function. There is imperfect voice leading, but in this context the handling of the chromatic melody is more important. Believe me, it takes quite some design effort to create such an intricate example progression. And you may have to stop the video here to study the 4-part setting in detail. Try this yourself and see how you fare while trying to obey all the rules. Listen to this example with the melody panned left and the 3-part harmony panned hard right. The chromatic harmony with roving chords in thirds generates a late romantic idiom. We pass through many local tonal centers and the progression lacks overall tonal stability. Some people will call this headache music. By design, I landed on a dominant chord structure E-flat 7 that allows the return to the opening D minor triad structure. Rapidly moving through many keys is the defining characteristic of this Schillinger approach, however. In part 2 I will come back to this aspect of the technique. The recommendation to use long note durations is obvious when hearing this busy harmonization. In the second step, which is a lot simpler than step 1, we add another voice to the chromatic harmony setting. Schillinger wants the melody M above the harmony, as a top layer so to speak. Note that I used occasional octave transposition to create a sufficiently wide interval between melody and the existing 3-part harmony. Then we add a fourth voice to the harmony. Remember that melody M and harmony combined are a complete 4-part functional harmony setting. The new voice in the harmony may be either a chordal function doubling or the next higher extension. So you may add a 7 to a triad or turn a 7th chord into a 9th structure. I've written these options above the staff. Mostly you'll find these in the lead harmony part, but lower inner voices may also be added. Note my error in the next to last chords. This should have been E-flat 7 chord structures. The consequence of simply inserting notes is that we may end up with unprepared dissonant chordal functions. Voice leading requirements are somewhat released. The correct handling of the chromatic steps in the melody is of primary importance, and we simply tolerate less than perfect harmony voice leading. For an overview of correct dissonance handling in diatonic harmony with chords in thirds, see this video tutorial. Listen to the finished example with melody M on the left and harmony H panned hard right. We finished the two-step process when applying the chromatic harmonization of a chromatic melody technique. The result is this denser texture in 2 layers. Hopefully this extended discussion of the 2-page section in the Schillinger book has been helpful. It leaves me with a few questions though. Why put the melody in the top layer? It seems the appropriate thing to do when we have a lead melody over an accompaniment, as in a vocal composition. However, in other music we might frequently find the melody in lower register instruments. We might split the harmony into 2 layers with each a number of parts and insert the melody in the middle. In that case, there are dangers for the chord progression texture. We may lose the coherence of the traditional close position voicing approach, and there is a higher possibility of crossing voices with the melody, which negatively affects transparency. The next question is, why use a 4-part harmony layer? Again, Schillinger recommends the standard setting, but I doubt that requirement. Yes, step 2 is a useful addition in order to obtain a denser texture. But a lighter setting with combined melody and 3-part harmony also is a viable option, as I will demonstrate in the orchestral composition example. In that example, I will also improve the quality of the chord progression and create more tonal stability. But here I stop this tutorial, which will otherwise become a very long episode. I suggest you take a break and then watch part 2 in the series, with the detailed discussion of the longer orchestral composition. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, support my tutorial production efforts and visit the website for more content. See you in part 2 and thanks for watching.